Now, on the Georgia vote, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump appear to square off in their first debate, but they're not the only ones on the ballot.
Many of these voters who are voting for Trump or voting for Harris are doing so because they don't like the alternative.
We sit down with Libertarian Party nominee Chase Oliver, why he's making a run for the White House and why he thinks he's better than the Democratic and Republican nominees. Also,
we are one, and we can all do this together.
This week's Voice of the Voter takes us to a coffee shop in Gwinnett County to hear from this first-time voter on what will guide his decision at the ballot box. And this morning, Val Sabat and Stephen Lawson sit down at our Politics Roundtable. All right now on the Georgia Vote.
From the 11 Alive studios, this is the Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Good Sunday morning and welcome to the Georgia Vote. Zach Merchant is on assignment this weekend. Well, this past week, the beginning of the school year was shattered by a senseless act of violence inside one Georgia high school. The scene, Apalachee High School in Winder. That's about an hour's drive from Atlanta. On Wednesday, two 14-year-old students and two instructors, they were killed. At least 9 other people, 8 students and 1 teacher were taken to hospitals. Colt Gray is the teen accused in this deadly mass shooting. A day after the shooting, the GBI arrested and charged Colt Gray's father. That's 54-year-old Colin Gray. Governor Brian Kemp joined law enforcement in Barrow County just hours after the mass shooting, saying that night wasn't the right time to speak on issues tied to any politics or policy.
Today is a day for an investigation to mourn these precious Georgians that we have lost, to thank the first responders that went, into the line of fire, the school staff, superintendent, the principal, and others that are just trying to hold this community together. That's what we need to be focused on right now.
Well, within hours of Wednesday's shooting, reaction came from 2 main contenders in the race for the White House. Vice President Kamala Harris brought it up during a campaign event in New Hampshire, along with offering emotional support to all of those involved, including first responders. She called for further action to end gun violence.
It's senseless. It is. We've got to stop it. And we have to end this epidemic of gun violence in our country once and for all. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. So we will continue, of course, to send our prayers and our thoughts to the families and all those who were affected.
Former President Donald Trump was in Battleground, Pennsylvania later that night for a town hall moderated by Fox News host Sean Hannity. And Trump touched on the shooting while also addressing recent acts of gun violence in the nation, including the assassination attempt on him, which came nearly 2 months ago.
What is going on?
Well, it's a sick and angry world for a lot of reasons. And we're going to make it better. We're going to heal our world. We're going to get rid of all these wars that are starting all over the place because of incompetent American leadership. And we're going to make it better.
Well, here at 11 Alive, we are working to bring you the latest on this Apalachee school shooting tragedy. You can stay on top of the latest developments by texting the word Apalachee to 404-885-7600, and we'll connect you with all of the news surrounding this tragedy. Well, in a little more than 48 hours, former President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris will meet in their very first debate. And that debate night will mark exactly 8 weeks before the November election. And we now have an understanding of the ground rules these 2 candidates will face on the debate stage Tuesday night. There is no live studio audience, same as the June debate here in Atlanta between Trump and President Joe Biden. Also, microphones will be muted, except when it's the candidate's turn to talk. Well, neither Vice President Kamala Harris nor former President Donald Trump are allowed to ask questions of each other, and there will be no opening statements. As for closing statements, former President Trump won a coin toss, and he decided to go last. This will be a 90-minute debate. It will be at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, hosted by ABC News. And NBC News will provide complete coverage and analysis on Tuesday. That's starting at 8 p.m. You can watch it right here on 11 Alive, and then stay with us after the debate for 11 Alive News at 11. Well, as for the campaigns, neither the Democratic nor Republican ticket was in Georgia this past week. But backers of Donald Trump, they were stumping for their candidate in a key slice of this battleground state. Billed as Team Trump's Agenda 47 policy tour, four surrogates of the former president's campaign hosted people at Chateau Elan in Brazelton. This group included Senator Rick Scott from Florida, former Small Business Administrator Linda McMahon, former United States Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, and Congressman Jason Smith from Missouri. Well, still ahead, he's forced Georgia's Senate race into a runoff 2 years ago. And now Chase Oliver is eyeing a much higher position. We'll hear what's driving his campaign as the Libertarian Party's nominee for president. Tuesday's debate between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris will give millions of Americans the chance to size up two major candidates for the White House. But there are some other presidential candidates on the ballot in November. One of them is Libertarian Chase Oliver, who lives right here in Atlanta. Well, 2 years ago, he ran for the U.S. Senate against Reverend Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. And his 81,000 votes, it was good for 2.1% of the general election, and it forced Warnock and Walker into a runoff. Well, this week, Oliver sat down with us here at 11 Alive to share his reasons for tossing his hat into the presidential ring.
For those who aren't familiar, what does it mean to be a libertarian in 2024?
Well, to me, a libertarian, broadly speaking, allows people to live their own life with their own values, so long as they do so in peace. We want to limit the government down to its appropriate size, which is to only be protecting our civil liberties and from harm, but not, control every aspect of our lives, every decision we make. So I say, if you're not harming anybody, your life is your life, your body is your body, your business is your business, and your property is your property. It's not mine, and it certainly isn't the government's.
So small government.
Absolutely. Limit it down to size to, much smaller than what we have today, certainly at the federal level.
Here, let me ask you this. Let's take it back to your Senate race right here in your home state of Georgia. Back in 2022, roughly 80,000 votes you were able to get in that race between Raphael Warnock, Herschel Walker, and yourself. 2% of the vote you were able to take there. My question to you is, why run for president of the entire country when you were only able to take about 2% of votes in your home state of Georgia for that Senate race?
Well, I think one of the most important things to be when you're a third party or an independent candidate is a true disruptor of the two-party system. That's what voters are looking for, is to actually disrupt the status quo and to show that there's an alternative option on the ballot that can actually grow in the long term. And we, of course, as a Senate candidate, I disrupted the two-party system quite well by forcing that runoff, encouraging voters to know that they have more than two choices. And that's why over 80,000 Georgians came out and selected me as their candidate, because they wanted to signal both they supported the libertarian message, but also they are not in support of a broken two-party system.
Clearly, it's a long shot to get that seat in the White House. What other wins are you guys going for here as a Libertarian Party?
Yeah, so long term, we're looking how can we build our party up. So there are wins like ballot access wins. Here in the state of Georgia, we can win ballot access for future candidates to run statewide. There are other states across the country that rely on this presidential and vice presidential vote to earn that ballot access across the country. We want to make it easier for libertarians and others to be able to run.
You are on the ballot in much of the nation, including right here in Georgia, including several swing states. Going back to that, disrupting the balance, what's your goal?
Well, my goal is to provide voters a true choice on the ballot they can feel good about voting for. So many people don't even get out to vote because they just don't see a choice that represents them. And that's a true travesty of our republic, is that, like 4 in 10 voters just don't feel represented. And I want voters to know that they can get out and support somebody without having to say, well, I'm voting for this because I don't like the other person, which is all you're getting from Republicans and Democrats. Many of these voters who are voting for Trump or voting for Harris are doing so because they don't like the alternative, Trump or Harris.
No. What do you say, and I don't mean to cut you off, but just on that point, what do you say to people who say even if they vote for a Chase Oliver, that it's kind of a throwaway vote because you're likely not going to win the presidency?
Well, if you live in one of these states that have ballot access requirements or major party status, you're actually creating the building blocks for further success on down the line. You're actually building something up foundationally, and so there's a success there. Also, you're letting your voice be heard about the issues that most matter to you. And so if you get out and vote Libertarian in this election, perhaps the Democrats and Republicans adopt policy strategies that align more with you. They say, hey, this is what these people wanted to see. That's why I'm going to support this in the future. And again, if we can even change the way we vote to something like a ranked choice voting, an instant runoff, so we don't have to wait weeks to see who wins the runoff, voters could feel comfortable selecting the Libertarian first, and Democrats and Republicans would come to those independent or Libertarian voters and say, here's why you put us second on the ballot, because we're going to give you A, B, and C.
When you look at a two-party system, you have said, and other people have said, that it just creates division. By having another third party come in, would it not just divide the country into three, or would it unify the country?
Well, what you would see is you would see coalition building. If you had 3 or more parties in government, you know, most of the nations of Europe have like 4 or 5 political parties, and what they have to do is they have to go coalition govern. They have to find areas of agreement, you know, say, hey, I agree with the Republicans on this area, let's work together with them. Or, hey, maybe there's Democrats who have this idea that I support, let's work across a coalition to get that happening. Hey, there's some Greens, or there's some Libertarians, or some Independents. Let's find those areas of agreement. And that's where you get real consensus building, and that's where you can, over the long term, pass legislation and govern in a way that's more representative of the total population, as opposed to two sides that are constantly be driven further away from each other, like when you try to put a magnet and just repels each other. That's what we have with a two-party system. And what that's going to do is push our politics further and further apart, more partisanship, more polarization. And of course, who is that serving? The people who pay for those people, the lobbyists and the corporate people who boss those lobbyists around. They're not fighting for you and me, and they're being traded like auction at a cattle yard. And that is a problem that we have in our democracy. And the only way to fix that is have a true, more representative democracy. Add more people to the ballot, change the way we vote, so we can have more choices and more voices in our politics.
Now, Oliver also talked about several policy-related topics ranging from the economy to immigration and the war on the Middle East. You can watch our full conversation right now on 11alive.com. And still ahead, we hear from our voice of the voter. But first, former executive director of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus, Val Sabak, and GOP communication strategist Stephen Lawson join us for our Politics Roundtable. You're watching the Georgia Vote. Time now for our Political Roundtable. Today we have Republican communications strategist Stephen Lawson. He served as a senior communications advisor to House Speaker John Burns and has worked for several other Georgia politicians, including Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. Right now, he's a principal at the law firm Dentons. And Val Sabak, Assistant Vice President at McGuire Woods Consulting and former Executive Director of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus, both returning panelists. Thank you both so much for being here. Yeah. And we start this conversation on a somber note. We saw the shooting this week that has really shaken up our entire state. Val, I want to start with you. Anytime these shootings happen, and it's sad to say that anytime because they happen far too often, but we see these renewed calls for gun reform. We're seeing them come heavily from Democrats here in Georgia. Do you think this shooting happening in our state is enough to move the needle?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if you look to last legislative session, there was some legislation that was proposed that would essentially give a tax break for folks to buy a gun safe or gun safety things. And I mean, that moved pretty far in the process. I think, unfortunately, with the tragedy that we saw this week, I think that there are going to be renewed calls and a renewed effort to push common sense legislation just like that, where both parties can agree on, come together and pass something that will save our children.
And Stephen, I'll ask you that. We're speaking of both parties. I mean, this is something that would have to go across the aisle, especially that we are in a Republican-controlled state legislature. We saw Governor Kemp at that time saying, you know what, this is not the right time. But we have seen Republican lawmakers say the focus needs to be on mental health. The focus needs to be on school safety. What are we expecting to hear from Republicans when it comes to actually enacting some change to prevent this from happening again?
Yeah, well, I think Val's absolutely right. There were a number of proposals that were left on the table last session, including incentivizing safe storage, training, things of that nature, mandatory security alarms. But look, over the last few years, Republicans in the General Assembly have prioritized and really made this front and center. There was over $100 million in school safety, for $45,000 for every school to have an SRO on the campus. There were 2 at this school. You know, there's a number of things. Mental health has obviously been a priority. I think it's going to have to be an all of the above approach. And I think Val's right. I think there's going to have to be some common sense compromise here. And I'm actually confident that that's going to happen.
Do you guys think a special session will be called to address this?
I don't know if there's going to be a special session, but I think if there isn't, it will be front and center when legislators reconvene in January.
I agree with that.
Definitely something we will be looking to, and of course our thoughts are with all of the families as they are impacted by this. I want to switch the topic a little bit to talk about Chase Oliver, who came on as the Libertarian presidential nominee. I asked him, you know, and you guys heard it, your road to the White House a bit of a long shot. What's the reason for this? I want to disrupt the system. Can he disrupt the system here in Georgia and potentially swing states? Stephen, we'll start with you.
Yeah, no, I totally think he can. Obviously, we saw, you know, the road to the White House runs through Georgia, and it is a state that was decided by, you know, less than 12,000 votes just 4 years ago. So I think the margin of error for both candidates is extremely slim. And I think when you're talking about third-party candidates, write-in candidates, votes that are going to skip the top of the ticket completely, I think every single vote from here until November in this state is going to count. And I think Chase Oliver could siphon off a good portion of those.
And Fella, ask you, we didn't see this part on air. It is online at 11alive.com, but I asked Chase about, does he feel like Benjamin Netanyahu's doing enough in the Middle East? He said absolutely no, he should back out. I know that Democrats right now are having an issue with some of those voters who are not happy with how the Biden administration has handled Israel. Could those voters potentially go libertarian or seek another third-party candidate who would listen to them? And how would Kamala Harris combat that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, exactly what Stephen said. I mean, this is going to be a game of inches. And so every voter in Georgia counts and matters. I mean, I think that that's up to the the Harris campaign to come in and say, listen, like, you know, this is a reason to vote for me. This is a reason to support me. And she needs to engage those voters who potentially could vote for that third party.
Well, speaking about engaging the voters, they're going to have a chance to do that, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, Tuesday night. And then there's going to be 8 weeks until the election. Can you believe it? Val, let's start with you. What does Harris have to do on that debate stage to prove to voters that she is the woman for this job?
You know, I think she has to lay out what her agenda is and also talk about the successes that she had as vice president. I think folks want to look towards the future. I think folks want to see they want to support a candidate that is going to say, okay, here's how I'm going to make a better future for you. Here's what I'm going to do to make a better future for your kids. I think people want to see a game plan that will help them say, okay, tomorrow is going to be a better day for us.
Absolutely. And of course, on the opposite side of that, former President Trump is going to come in and say, she's actually made the country worse in the last 3.5 years. Stephen?
Yeah, I think if he focuses on policy and not personal attacks or personal insults, that's going to be his best path forward. Obviously, he's had issues doing that in this campaign. I think it's hurt him dramatically. I think it's given Vice President Harris the momentum. I would say going into this debate, can Donald Trump focus on forward-thinking, solution-oriented policy and not personal attacks? That's going to be the deciding factor, I think, in this election.
And the mic muting might help Trump. Maybe it looked like Harris's campaign wanted those mics on.
Yeah, no, I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic. Obviously, you know, I think that probably helped former President Trump in the last debate, but this is a whole new ballgame, as we know, with a vice president who I think will be able to articulate some of her points more clearly and coherently than President Biden was able to.
All right. Well, we will see. Thank you both so much for coming on. We can't wait to talk to you. Like I said, 8 weeks. Oh, my gosh. We're almost there. Well, this week's Voice of the Voter is already making a name for himself in politics, and he is gearing up to vote in his very first general election. See what's driving his choices at the ballot box. That's coming up. Well, we say this every week. You can't have the Georgia vote without Georgia voters. Their choices in November could be decisive in the race for the White House. And this week, we are off to Alcove Coffee House along the shores of Lake Lucerne in Gwinnett County to talk with Akbar Ali, a first-time voter and a junior at Kennesaw State University, who is also first vice chair for the Gwinnett County Democratic Party.
I was in theater in high school.
Yeah?
Yeah, after every performance, like, you know, it's tradition to just go out to IHOP with, like, everybody, right?
So, I mean, you grew up basically in Gwinnett County your whole
Yes.
life.
Mm-hmm. This is my home.
So, you're 20 years old. You're a student at Kennesaw State University.
That's right.
A junior.
That's right.
So let me ask you this. This is your first presidential election
Yes.
that you'll be voting in. As somebody who grew up in Georgia, what issue is most important for you? What's driving you to the polls this year?
It's always been one issue that's core to me, and no matter what election year it is, I feel like it is the issue to protect above all else, and that's social mobility. I come from a background where, you know, I have two younger brothers, but I was really the only one who could witness my parents like building a life for themselves, like within this country after emigrating. I was raised on the idea that this country was the only one in the world where a son of two immigrant parents can get involved within the politics of this country and actually hold a position at age 20.
Do you equate what you just said to as this quote-unquote American dream? Is that what the American dream is?
I feel the American dream shifts throughout time. In the 50s, it might have been like, you know, the white picket fence with like the suburbia, right? But I feel like it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Do you know who you plan to vote for in November?
I absolutely do.
And who is that?
I plan to vote for Madam Vice President Kamala Harris.
And why is that?
Going back to when I was in middle school in 2016, when Donald Trump got elected, one of the things I noticed was that it was almost like people got permission to be more abrasive, to be more going against the ideals of this country that like I've been raised on, the kind where we are open, we're inclusive. And so I fully believe that the ideals that Vice President Harris stands for is the kind that we need right now, not the one where it's us versus them. Instead, it's we are one, and we can all do this together.
And we always like to end on this. What are you most optimistic about?
In November, I'm most optimistic that there will be a sense of just that sense of hope, that sense of like I haven't felt like happy or optimistic about our politics in a very long time. But as of late, there's been a lot of optimism on my end around me as well. Like on my college campus, within my friend circles, a lot of people are like, we're actually very excited to vote.
Our thanks to him for that conversation. And thank you all so much for watching us today. We'll see you back here next Sunday at 11 for another edition of the Georgia Vote.